Hello and welcome to Surveyor Says, the podcast from the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Each week, we bring you fascinating guests that are involved in the profession of surveying. We cover a lot of ground, including Table A Talk with Gary Kent, Point of Order with the NSPS Joint Government Affairs Team, Future Focus, highlighting current and future leaders of the profession, and everything survey-related in between. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Surveyor Says. Hello and welcome to another episode of Surveyor Says. This is Tim Burch, and it's been a while, but I roped him back in. He's been on the road. He's been spreading the gospel across our great land about land title survey issues, but we got him back. It's time to get back in the saddle with some land title survey things, and so it's the one and only Gary Kent. Gary, thanks for joining me today.
Hello, Tim. It's always my pleasure.
All right. Well, something you and I talked about a little while ago and thought this would be a great topic for our listeners, practitioners, what have you. And really, it's not just the practitioner itself, the surveyor, the signing surveyor. This is anybody that's engaged in the survey itself to know what contractually is obligated to be able to do with this survey. So we thought we'd jump into contracts and what needs to be done to make sure that the surveyor is protected all the way through. So initially, what do you tell people when you start talking about contracts when it comes to a land title survey?
Yeah, so that's a great jumping off point. I tell people that 100% of the time they have a contract. If you agree to do a land title survey, you have a contract. The advantage or the issue is it written, in which case it's pretty clear what you've agreed to do, or is it a verbal contract, in which case it may not be so clear what was agreed upon. So having a written contract is critically important. Kurt and I used to do. I used to go over to Victor O'Shinner, which is now just Victor, and that was a very large professional liability manager there in Washington, D.C. area, I think in Chevy Chase, actually, on Wisconsin Avenue. And there was an attorney there named Joe Jones. We got to know really well. Joe was a really good guy. And he and I were talking about this one time. He said, when I would get a call from an insured who'd say, "Hey, I got to let you know I've got this claim." He said, "My first question was always, what did your contract say? What did you contract to do?" And his comment was, "I was so often disappointed." And I'm like, "Well, why?" He goes, "Because they didn't have a contract, right? Or didn't have a written contract." And that's one thing that professional liability managers are going to tell you. You should have a written contract, because then it's not a he said, she said. It's in writing as to what you agreed to do. And contracts are very powerful instruments, right? If somebody agrees to do something and someone else agrees to do something by virtue of signing the contract, that will pretty much be upheld. So it's really important. I will add, there's only one disadvantage I can think of to a written contract, and that is, at least in some states, I know it's the case in Indiana, that the statute of limitations on a verbal contract is shorter. This is for breach, right? Statute of limitations for breach of contract is shorter on a verbal contract than it is on a written contract. But I don't think that is really does not outweigh the advantages of the written contract.
Exactly. I just know early in my career, the small firm I worked for in Central Illinois, that was one thing that the owner prided himself on, was his relationship with his clients. So many of our jobs we did was a handshake. That's the trust I have between myself and the client, which I get it. I mean, that's a totally honorable thing, but that was also 30 some years ago. But, over time, everything has become so litigious that, yeah, I think it has to be really written out. What is the expectation of the surveyor in that deliverable? So no, I think this is a great topic to talk about, because there's so many things that, and you have said famously for years, everything's negotiable. So really it comes down to putting whatever terms in that contract you're willing to put out for your liability. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it is a fair statement. And yeah, and speaking of that, I mean, your professional liability insurance folks would be happy to give you some guidance on, what should be in a contract and how it could be formulated and that sort of thing, because they certainly have no more interest in there being a claim against you than you have interest in having a claim against you. So they can be a really good resource to help in that sort of thing.
Okay, so when we're talking about contracts and limiting our liability, I guess what are some of the things that you would that people would typically contact you and say, what's some really things that stand out to you that should be in the contract, and on the other hand, things that should not be in a contract?
Yeah, so I'll touch on those, and then maybe we can just kind of walk through the process. One of the most common questions, or probably the most common question I get, is being asked to certify to successors and assigns. And can I do that? And isn't that increasing my liability? And blah, blah, blah. And I've written on this so many times, and we've talked about it so many times. It's discouraging. I still get calls all the time on this, but on the other hand, I know, it used to be a magazine came in the mail and we all sat down in the evening and read the magazine. And now we're getting pulled in 15 different directions, and we get emails all day long with information in them. And it's just impossible to absorb everything, which I think actually that's a whole different topic. But
right. Yes,
really
exactly.
quite a major problem that none of us are probably as well informed as in a sense as we used to be, because it's go all the time, and there's no time to stop and think about anything. But so who we certify to is one thing, and that can absolutely and should be controlled by the surveyor in the contract. And that's what I do. I put in my contract that I am going to certify to these parties. And if I have the title commitment, a lot of times they're already listed, right? They've already nailed down the bank. They already know the entity. So I'll put in my contract, I am going to certify to ABC Corporation, who is, if it's a sale, I'm going to certify to the buyer, the lender, and the title company. So I look on the title commitment, and the proposed insured is ABC Corporation. And the title commitment is First American Title Insurance Company, and the bank is Chase Bank. So my contract will say, I'm going to certify to Chase Bank, First American Title Insurance Company, and the ABC Corporation, period. Then I add another sentence, and I say additional parties may be certified to for an additional fee. Right? So now I'm in the driver's seat, and as far as that goes, successors and assigns is in a sense an additional party, but we can talk about that in a minute. But then I'm in the driver's seat because one of the most common things anymore is the law firm wants to be certified to. Okay, well, if it's a regular client of mine and I know these people, I'm probably just going to go ahead and do it. Keep everybody happy. No harm, no foul. But if it's, if it's a law firm from another state or something, I'm probably going to say, sure, I'll be glad to do that. You notice in the contract, there's an additional fee. And so that's going to be whatever I want it to be, $500, $1,000, $100, whatever it is the more parties you certify to, potentially the more liability that you're exposing yourself to. So that is absolutely probably the most common thing I hear about is, what about certification? And I tell people, if you deal with this in the contract, you are in the driver's seat, and then you can decide how to deal with it when the question comes.
Yeah, and that is a good point, because so often, now I'm coming out of the private sector, that was that was the case so often that you're right. They would add somebody after the fact, after the contract's agreed to, would say, yes, such and such attorney from California needs to be added to this because they're going to oversee this. Well, that's fine, but it's extending my liability. So it's going to cost this. I feel like the survey is worth X dollars. The site is worth X dollars. My liability on all of this is extended that much further. Why not? Because chances, that's what I always would tell our contemporaries and my staff. Bottom line is, what are the odds we're going to do work with these people again? Mm-hmm. And they're going to pay somebody for this service. And we've already done it. We're extending our liability. That's why it's worth that extra. And like you said, the surveyor is in the driver's seat with a signed contract with that statement in it. And that really, really works. So yeah, good point. Great point. So, yes. So what are some things that, some other things that come up in contracts that should or shouldn't be in there?
I think that it's good to specify exactly what you're going to do, right? So if you are in a state that has regulation, it's usually regulation, that's rules adopted by the board. I think in a couple states it might be statute, but there are standards in your state in most cases. There are a few states, New York is working on them, but Pennsylvania doesn't have mandatory standards and California doesn't, Minnesota doesn't. That if you're in a state with mandatory standards, I mean, here's how I write my contract. It starts off and it says, I'm going to perform a survey pursuant to, and then I cite our administrative rule, 865 IEC 1-12. That's our survey standards in Indiana. Right now, the client knows nothing about that, but I know that whether it's a land title survey or any other boundary survey, I have to follow the law of my state. So I put that in there. Perform the survey, perform or conduct a survey pursuant to 865 IEC 1-12 and the 2021 minimum standard detail requirements for ALTA NSPS land title surveys. And I like to spell that all out. Let's be specific. It's not an ALTA survey. It's an ALTA NSPS survey. I don't want to be vague. I want to say it's the 21 standards, and this right. is the official title, 2021 minimum standard detail requirements for ALTA and SPS land title surveys. And then I get into Table A. I'll say including Table A items. We can talk about Table A items here in a minute, but I will list those. And then if there are Table A items that I think or some commentary that I want to put in there as kind of a qualifier, I'll put that right in the contract. But we might talk about the Table A items. A lot of, I've had numerous times people call me up, surveyors call me up and say, what, I've even had attorneys call say, what are the typical Table A items? Say, well, the typical Table A items, there probably isn't such a thing. I suppose most of us have an idea on what most people generally want. But when somebody asks me that question, I think a couple of things. Number one, there are some things required by my standards, right? In Indiana, I have to set or find a monument. So Table A item 1 is automatically included. They don't have a choice on that. Table A item 4 is the area, gross land area, but area is required in Indiana. So those two items I am automatically going to include. Table A item 8, that's the substantial features not otherwise located that 99.995% of the time, all surveyors in the United States, whether they say it or not, include Table A item 8, right? Because if you look at the standards themselves, there's not that much that needs to be shown on a land title survey, right? The building, right. The access points, the utilities, evidence of use by others, that's about it, or evidence around the boundary. But we all locate the parking lot, we locate the sidewalks, we locate the landscaped areas and the flagpole and the swimming pool. We all do that because clients expect to see that. And if we ever sent it out and we didn't show that stuff, they'd probably send it back and say, hey, what are you doing? You didn't finish the survey, right?
Right.
So I automatically include table A item 8 because that's just a normal thing. Actually, Dick Bales and I and Richard Bales is on the committee on the joint work group and has been involved in the standards longer than I have. And he and I talked one time about, he's a title attorney. You know Dick Bales, he's a title attorney.
Absolutely.
Chicago. And, he and I talked one time about, we ought to just make this mandatory because everybody does it 100% of the time. And let's just make it a required part of the standards. But then I quickly realized I would have to define what a substantial improvement is, which I'm just going to respectfully decline to try and list all that out. So we left it as a checkoff item, but that's, so those three are pretty much automatics, at least in Indiana, and probably in most states. Otherwise, when somebody asks me, what about, what are the typical items? What I'll say to them is, I'm assuming there's a lender, right? You're doing a land title survey because it's either a sale or a refinance. If it's a refinance, we know there's a lender. If it's a sale, there is probably a lender. And so I say to them, talk to your lender, right? Because they're the ones who are going to control what needs to be included in Table A. And what we, as you know, Tim, what we really don't like is to have somebody cherry pick Table A. Oh, I don't think I want to do that. It's expensive, blah, blah, blah. And you send the survey out, and 2 days before closing, they say, oh, we need Table A item 11B, and we need this, and we need this, and we need this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, that's not what we contracted to do. Well, so we can just avoid those problems by telling them up front, contact your lender, and they're going to have requirements. Send those to me.
Right. Well, I guess that's a good point. That you're right. We always get those questions of, well, what's typical? And you're right. It depends on the site, depends on the use, depends on the state you're in. You're exactly right. I had just I guess an off cuff thing is you're talking about what's a substantial improvement. We had a call the other day here that somebody was doing a golf course. And whether or not it was our opinion that all of the cart paths needed to be shown because those would be substantial improvements. And you're exactly right. Who's to say? I mean, is the buyer wanting to see that? I mean, that to me, that is something that is negotiable. That's definable. If you're not using item 15 and using a photo, do you need to go shoot all those things? Talk to your client and find out. And that's why I guess I like your point that it's important to have that contract and have these things negotiated and laid out rather than just say this is what I think it should be. Definitely don't let them sign that if that's not what they're going to intend the deliverable is going to be.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a good point about that, because there are certain Table A items that you may want to expound on in the contract, right? So Table A item 15, of course, is a perfect example. And I've told the story many times about the 1,100 acre chemical plant that I surveyed on a land title survey one time. And the buyer had said, we don't need to see all the buildings, right? They're giving us the site plans. We got the building plans. We don't need to see all that stuff.
Famous last words.
Yeah. Well, and it was exciting. There were, as I recall, 88 buildings. I mean, it was going to probably add $100,000 to it was 1,100 acres. And I said, okay, well, how about we do this? Table A item 15. I can get high resolution rectified ortho color ortho photos. We can overlay that on the survey. You'll see the buildings, you'll see everything. But I said, and this is consistent with what Table A item 15 says. I said, but there's stuff you're not going to see, right? Because it's at a certain scale. And if we're on the ground,
Right.
we're going to see this manhole, and we may not see that in the photograph. And there's going to be shadows, and you're going to see the roof line, not the actual face of the building. And we can't do the boundary this way, and we can't, there's a fence around the whole property. We're going to have to locate the fence. But all the stuff interior, we can do that. And they said, oh, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. So, and what Table A item 15 says is we have to have that conversation, and we have to agree in writing. So you put that right into the contract that this is what you're going to do. And then you have, prevented problems later on coming up and saying, wait a minute, you didn't do this, or you didn't do that.
Right. Exactly.
15 is a great example of that.
Exactly. And with technology, so many companies are bringing UAVs under their, into their service, and being able to do some of these things, like you said, at a high accuracy. So it's nice to have that as additional information. But you're right. Make sure it's spelled out in the contract that you are going to utilize 15 for some of these entities. That, yes, it's going to save you time and money, and the client some money, hopefully, by not having to locate every little single thing. But they have to also understand, because it's 15, there's only so much. But you're spot on there. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's a trade-off.
It is. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to risk what I've been doing for many years with this question. Besides spelling it out in the scope of the contract, the Table A items that we would offer for that contract, we would typically also then add at the end of the contract the actual Table A with our check marks, so people could actually see what is being checked off, what those items are, and actually also see what the survey is not going to show by having that marked up Table A list. Was that a smart thing to do, or is that maybe opening ourselves up for something else?
No, I wouldn't think so. I've done that kind of indirectly, but I like the idea, because they can see right there, here's what we're agreeing to do. And we'll talk about the need to perhaps, clarify or qualify some of those items in the contract. But having that right there, they can see, here's our options. And maybe you send that off to them, and they're like, hey, I was looking at that item, 13. I'm thinking maybe
exactly
that. So I kind of like the idea. Back, I don't know, 10 years ago, somebody, some surveyor somewhere, I don't, if they're on, I apologize, I don't remember who it was, but they had reformatted Table A so that they had the checkbox on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I think there were maybe two columns, and one was a column where they would check it off. For example, the left side, is left side of Table A says, check this item off, and that's what we're going to do.
Right.
But on their first column to the right, they had the option of checking off. For example, if it's monuments in Indiana, that has to be done. The client may not want to pay for it, but that's too bad.
Yeah, that's no choice.
Required in Indiana law. But on the second column on the right was a dollar figure. And this company would go through the property, go through the survey, the information they had, and they would fill in you check off an item, here's what it's going to cost, right? Now, I can't do that for monuments because that has to be included in Indiana, but I might say, flood. You want a flood statement that's whatever, $300. You want an address, it's $50. And every single item had a dollar amount associated with it. And this is on Table A that they sent out to the client to have them decide. And my comment to them was, I'll bet you don't get a whole lot of Table A items checked off. And they said, yeah, because it goes along with the email that somebody sent me one time. where they blacked stuff out so I couldn't see who it was, but they had sent an email to a client and they said, here's table A, which table A items do you want? And they got an email back, which they sent me. And the email says, regarding table A, we want all the table A items that don't cost anything. Right? Which is a spectacular way to select table A items, right?
Oh boy.
And you know what I would love to say in a situation like that is, well, I guess you don't want any of them then, because every table A item's got, you want an address, it's $50. You know, you want this, it's $25 or whatever.
Right.
And so I love that idea. That would take some work, you know, because you have to figure out what all these things would cost. But I like it because it shows people that this isn't just a free, you know, check this off for free. There is a cost associated with everything you want. It's just like a law firm. It's just like a title company. Oh, you want this endorsement? Well, there's a cost associated. So I love that idea. I actually proposed that kind of a little bit tongue in cheek, and you probably saw that or may have seen that when we were working on 2021. And while people generally liked it, they're like, yeah, probably doesn't belong in the standards, which I didn't disagree with. But
you're right.
That's the idea.
That is a negotiating tactic that shouldn't necessarily maybe be in the standard, but you're right. You're absolutely right. I do want to go back and focus on something that you said a little bit ago, especially like Indiana and Illinois was the same way, and other states. And I guess to help drive this point home, coming from Gary Kent, Mr. Land Title Survey, is that in these states where monumentation is not an option, we need to put that in the contract. Besides saying you're going to do table A number 1, it's a statute, it's a state rule, it's a policy, it's whatever. It's not optional, because I know I've talked to so many attorneys across the country wanting to do, doing a survey in Illinois, and they're like, no, my surveyors no, I don't want number 1. It's not an option. You got to put that in there. I guess, please tell the world one more time that if it's something that's mandatory, it needs to be in the contract and it needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the idea. I don't recall that I do that, but I probably just throw it in there, and if they say, well, I don't want that, I'm like, well, sorry, that's required in Indiana. It would make more sense to go ahead and just say that. By the way, here are 2 or 3 items that are required in this state. But surveyors have to understand land title survey standards are not the law. Right? They are a set of standards that have been adopted by 2 organizations, NSPS and ALTA, and there's no ALTA NSPS police. Right? The police is you and me and the attorneys and the lenders and the title companies who are going to police this, or our competing surveyors. They're the police. The real police is your state law. So if your state law says you have to report an acreage on the survey and you have to set monuments, then the fact that that's optional on the land title survey standards does not mean it's optional, because you have to comply with the law in your state. And we address this, I think it's in section 3B of the standards. And section 3B says there are administrative rules, ordinances, statutes that have been adopted by states and in some cases local jurisdictions that regulate the practice of surveying in those areas. And we have to comply with those laws.
Exactly. I mean,
there's just no other way around that.
Exactly. It's whatever the appropriate boundary law is, that's what needs to be followed, because at the heart of it, I mean, that's what I think, sometimes in talking to some of our contemporaries and practitioners, that it's almost like they lose that sight that, really the ALTA is a dressed up boundary survey. And that's what the base of that still needs to be a boundary determination. And what would you do on a normal everyday boundary, whatever was required by your state and your jurisdiction. So, and I get it. I know there are some states where, monumentation is optional. I just had this conversation on the East Coast last week about New York and some of the areas that, well, it's not in statute. Monumentation is not required.
No.
And
those in the city, that's, New York is trying very hard to get a set of standards. And
yes,
problem as you have found out is the difference between being in downstate in the city and upstate in not in the city. So
yes,
it's a radically different environment, and I'm hoping they can work their way through it.
I hope so too. It's funny, just I guess a quick tangent on that, talking about that, coming from Illinois, and it was always the state of Chicago versus the rest of the state of Illinois. I shouldn't have thought that was unique, but to hear the New York City versus the New York State argument and the monumentation differences was just a little bit of an eye-opening. So I guess getting back to the subject, that's why it is so critical that these things be in a signed contract, agreed upon contract, to know exactly what you're going to be delivering and to limit your liability, especially in this day and age. Like I said, besides just being litigious, the values of some of the things we're surveying now are just obviously a little bit crazy. We've got to protect ourselves.
Yeah. When you have it in the contract, it's understood in the law that you have had a meeting of the minds, and a well-written contract will be very clear. It's one of the really important things that we strive for on the land title survey standards is that can you certify that you did a survey pursuant to these standards? And the answer is yes, you can. Sometimes I have people say, I don't like to do land title surveys. There's so much liability. See, I think you have more liability on a generic boundary survey.
Absolutely.
With two owners who don't understand what you're doing versus a land title survey where you've got attorneys and you've got title people looking over your shoulder. Not in the sense they're looking for something for you to do wrong, but they're going to point out, hey, that one easement, I don't see that easement on here. Oh yeah, all right, I need to have that easement. And they have some general concept of what a survey involves, whereas your average homeowner doesn't have a clue what you're doing. And we know that your average homeowner is more than happy to spend $50,000 suing their neighbor over 2 inches, which is simply not going to happen on most land title surveys.
Right, exactly. Well, and something that I always try to stress to fellow surveyors is that I've always taken the approach, this has just been ingrained in me, that any survey could end up in court, any survey. And some people will say, well, that's a negative way to look at it. Well, you have to do what you need to do to protect yourself. And a signed contract will help do that. It's no different than getting out in your car every day, and you can be the best driver, the safest driver, but somebody still might hit you. Something still might happen that's out of your control. That there are things you're providing that survey to the best of your ability, to the best of your knowledge, your research. There may be something, the $1 million manhole, whatever, that may sneak up, but you need to protect yourself. And this is one significant way through a signed contract to limit that liability.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, identifying the parties you're going to certify to, the certification that you're going to use. That's another item we haven't touched on, but we pretty much did away with that problem. I think it was in 2011, probably, when we finally had it up to here with lenders telling us what certification we were going to use. So in 2011, we drew a line in the sand and we said the following unaltered, I think it says only the following unaltered certification may be placed on the face of the plat or map, except pursuant to Section 3B. And Section 3B is identifying, for example, in the state of Indiana, my certification has to have certain wording in it. Right? So So when I do a contract, I say we are going to use the certification mandated in section 7 of the standards, but that includes in the end, because it says that you have to use that except as may be required by 3B. And so what I'm telling them indirectly is I'm going to use this certificate, but I have to add another sentence because that's what Indiana requires. That, we mostly took care of that problem in 2011, but I put it in there because let's be clear, right? I'm not using some other certificate. This is the one you're getting. I add a sentence, by the way, after that says a lender's certificate may be provided, number one, for an additional fee, and number two, that the wording of that certification will be acceptable to the surveyor. So when they shove this 1.5 page certificate in front of you the day before closing and tell you that you have to sign this, number one, I'm in the driver's seat because my contract said I might do that. I might.
Right.
And if I do it, it's going to cost more money. And we are going to negotiate that wording to my satisfaction. And I think this is such an important point because, I don't think it's as bad as it used to be, but the attorneys are going to browbeat you. You can't change anything. It's got to look just like this. Tim, you're the first surveyor I ever ran across who wouldn't sign this certificate. I asked that question in program. How many of you have been told you're the first surveyor who ever was, protested this? And 2/3 of the people raise their hand, and I say every one of you is apparently the first surveyor, right? Who wouldn't do this.
Exactly.
And so you have to stand up. And my point in specifying this sort of thing is that surveyors should not misunderstand. Attorneys know exactly what they're doing, right? It is well known to them that they are asking us to sign certificates that we should not sign. They know that. There is no question. They will tell you they don't know. They will tell you there's no additional liability. Never heard of anybody who protested this. Never knew anybody who wanted to change the wording. You're the first surveyor who's had a problem with this. That used to upset me. It doesn't anymore. That's just an attorney doing their job, right? You hire an attorney to, among other things, shift liability from you to someone else. And if they can get some unsuspecting surveyor to sign a certificate that the surveyor should not sign, good for them, right? So that's why I tell surveyors, no, don't fall for that crap, is what it is, right?
Yes.
Tell them I might do that certificate, I might not, but if I do, we're going to change the wording to where it's satisfactory to me. And as an aside, you can send that to your professional liability people. They will give you guidance on what you should say and what you shouldn't say. So,
exactly.
I think that's a critical point.
Yep. Exactly.
Don't bend under the pressure because they know that what they're doing, right? That it's all a charade. They're just trying to get you to do something that they know you should not do.
Exactly. And it just puts the onus of that liability back on the surveyor, which it's exactly what we're talking about and why it's important to have the right verbiage in that contract that's protecting you, the surveyor. I mean, that's the whole purpose, is you're providing a service, you're providing information that you can be held liable for if it in fact is fraud, not necessarily fraudulent, but if it's wrong, if there's something that is done is wrong. We got to do something, you just have to do it to make sure that you protect yourself. So,
right.
And I like your statement about, putting that verbiage in there about the certification. So, that to me is one of those things that seems like it always comes back, even with the signed contract. And they say, oh, well, but now the lenders stepped up and put this. No, this is what's agreed upon. This is what's required. And like you said, it puts puts the surveyor in the driver's seat to say, I may look at it, I may decide to sign it, and if I do, I have the right to charge you for it. So, it's all about having that the control over your own destiny on some of this stuff.
That's correct. And part of the problem, Tim, is that lenders, you would think that they're really sophisticated when it comes to this stuff, but they're not. They often think that they have to get us to do something in a certification in order that they can get the title coverage that they want. For example, there are utility endorsements, right? And most lenders want a utility. You're selling a hotel, and the lender wants this title company to give them a utility endorsement that basically says all the utilities necessary for operating the premises are available through public rights of way or in easements. And if that wording sounds familiar, there's a reason that sounds familiar. So they want that endorsement, and they think in order to get that endorsement, they have to have us certify that all utilities necessary for operation of the premises are available through public rights of way or recorded easements. They don't need that. The title company looks at this hotel and says, it's an operating hotel. It's been here for 10 years. We're fairly certain that they have electricity and gas and sewer and water, right? The surveyor does not need to certify that stuff. Now, if you do, you better be sure that what you're saying is correct. But the fact is, we are asked that stuff not because the lender's being a pain in the butt. It's because they don't realize that we don't have to say that in order for them to get their endorsement. I actually had that conversation with an attorney one time. He said, well, I need to get this endorsement. It wasn't utility, it was something else. He said, I need you to say this to get this endorsement. I said, let's get the title company on the phone. They don't need me to say this in order to get that endorsement. And of course, I was right. You get the title company on the phone, they're like, oh no, we'll do that. Right? So it's just very frustrating that a lot of these problems are because the lenders haven't done their research. They don't know. I actually had a lender tell me one time, I only do this because I know if you do this, I get what I want.
Exactly.
No interest in understanding what was going on.
Well, I've actually still got a couple more. I know we're running a little longer than normal, but I got a couple more good things I think we needed to talk about. This is such a great topic. One question I have for you in putting into a contract to agree upon, what do you think about deliverables?
Yeah, I put in my contract that we are going to complete the survey, and then we are going to send it out unsigned for review. And then we say we will address one set of comments, one set of the consolidated comments of all the interested parties, right? So I'm not going to respond to comments from the lender. And I'm not going to respond to comments from the buyer, I'm not going to respond to comments from the title company. They all need to get together and provide me one set of comments. So our contract says that's included, right? We're going to send the survey out unsigned, and I'll explain why we do that. We send it out unsigned. They will review it. They'll send us a letter or an email that says, here's all of our concerns. We will then address those. And this is what the contract says. We will address those comments, and addressing them doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do them. It might be something I can't do. We'll address the comments, and then we will sign and certify the survey, and we will send out as a PDF and I think we say up to 4 copies if requested. We say that on the initial one also. We'll send out the PDF or copies if they want them for review. When it's all done, we sign, certify, send a PDF. It's kind of interesting. I think in the last, in the last 4 years, I don't think I've sent a hard copy out in the last 4 years.
Very few.
But that's what we do. Now, the reason that we send it out unsigned, and I just talked with a surveyor about this a couple days ago. If you sign it and send it out, we know there's going to be comments and changes, right? There almost 100% of the time there's something. Well, if I have signed it and sealed it, I have to show that change as a revision, right? And so, and then if I reply to comments from the lender and from the buyer and from the title company, all of a sudden I sign the survey, then the final one is done 2 weeks later and it already shows 2 or 3 revisions, right? That does, number one, it makes me crazy. And the other one, it's just not necessary. So I send it out unsigned, which means it's not a finished survey yet. And then I can address all those comments and not have to show them as a revision, right? I address the comments, then I sign and seal it and send it out. And our contract, by the way, says any additional comments will be addressed time and materials.
Right.
So that, I don't know if that covers the issue on deliverables, but that's how we deal with it. And it works really well.
Well, I don't think there's any one tried and true, this is what the committee and the standard says. It's just, you've been around the block enough. You know what works for the system and for our profession. I think it's good to hear that as a typical, as a prototype for people to think about putting in their contracts, because there's always seems to be that issue on, well, you didn't give me what I thought I was going to be getting. Well, what did we agree upon? Put it in the contract.
Exactly.
Put it in the contract.
Right.
I guess the other thing I would ask you about contractual, and it's not necessarily from just a standard point of view, but also just, from a good practice. What about delivery dates? How do you feel about putting delivery dates in there?
I try to avoid a specific delivery date because then I am contractually obligated to that, other than, acts of God type of things, but which are written into our contract. I like to put in deliverable date. What I typically put in the contract is as agreed upon. Right? Now, sometimes we get hired on a land title survey and they are adamant, this is a deal. We have to have this 3 weeks from Friday or whatever. If I know that's the case, and pretty much unless I agree to that, we're not going to get to work. And if we're pretty certain we can get it done, I'll put that in there, but I don't like to. I would rather just say as agreed upon, and then, then that gives us some leeway. And they say we need it a week from Friday. I'm like, well, I probably can't do that. How about, the following Wednesday? And they're like,
right.
Okay. And so we've agreed on something and we're all happy. But, I've had advice before, that's something that you might try and avoid if you can.
Yes, I completely agree. Because I know one issue that we kept coming up against when we were kind of backed into a corner to put a date on, then we don't get a title policy in time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's, I don't have the title policy, or I get it the night before and it takes, X amount of time to go through it. There's no way we can still deliver a final survey based upon, your lack of response to some things. So, that's one thing I always try to caution people. If you're going to do something like that, give yourself X number of days after receipt of final title or something to include.
Right. You don't want to end up backing yourself into a corner. Yeah.
Right. And, something that I contemplated doing, and I don't know if this makes sense or not. I mean, so often we get pro forma titles versus the final versions, and that to be able to put in there, this needs to be based upon the final title commitment that's determined and current, not something somebody's just dredged up from 2 years ago. Nothing's changed. I mean, it really, I guess there's that fine line of defining current, but making sure that it's not some working title versus the final version. Yeah,
well, let's talk about that for a second. And I know we're running long here, but
quite all right. Good topic.
What a title commitment is it's an offer to provide title insurance. right? Under subject to certain exceptions and under certain conditions, because you have a vicious circle that I can't buy the property without the loan, and I can't get the loan until they get title insurance, and they can't get title insurance until I own the property, right? So you have this vicious circle, and that's where a title commitment comes in. What a title commitment says is on Schedule A, it says we are agreeing to provide this amount of insurance on this property to these people, right? And then it says basically subject to the exceptions that are listed in Schedule B2, right? The easements and those sorts of things. If certain things happen, right? So we're going to provide this insurance on this property for this amount of money to these people, subject to these exceptions, if certain things happen. Those certain things are listed in Schedule B1. We usually don't look at B1, but that tells the things that have to happen in order that a policy will be issued. And that gets everybody pretty much to the closing table.
Good.
Now, a pro forma is, well, the title commitment will change, right, over time because, somebody found an easement, or the last version of the title commitment will reference our survey on it. What a pro forma is, that a lot of lenders, a lot of people want to see this. So we've got the final title commitment, right? But we want to see what is our policy going to look like when all is said and done, right? Because maybe the commitment has come out, the final commitment, and the title company has said, well, we're going to take exception to this fence encroachment. And the lender has persuaded them to not take an exception for that fence encroachment. They're like, it's a 1 foot encroachment and we're buying 30 acres, just insure over it. And maybe they agree to do that. Well, what the pro forma is, typically it used to be, I don't know how they do it now, but it literally was a printout of the last title commitment, and they'd take a pen and they would mark it up and say, well, we're going to delete this one exception here. And, and they would handwrite on there, and Schedule B1 gets completely deleted because all of those things are going to get taken care of. So it's a markup that shows, in essence, kind of in sketch form, what the final policy will look like. And that's perfectly acceptable for a surveyor to use. You can do that. You can use a commitment that's 5 years old if you want. You can use a policy that's 10 years old. What the standards say is the most recent title work that is acceptable to the insurer, to the title company. You can get started on old stuff. But I tell surveyors, if somebody says, well, we're not going to get new title insurance, I always ask, is there a lender? And if they say, yeah, there's a lender, well, there will be new title insurance.
It's going to come back.
You can get started on that old stuff, but just keep in mind, you will be reviewing new title work before it's all said and done. And that raises some other questions we can talk about another time, about exceptions and stuff like that. So I try and encourage surveyors, don't get too hung up or too worried about that the information you've been given is old. You have to, by the standards, you have to put on the survey what the source of title was. If it's a commitment from 5 years ago, that doesn't bother me in the least. I'm going to say on the survey, title was based on this commitment from 5 years ago. Somebody's going to take exception to that at some point. So I need to understand that will change. I am going to spend some more time on it, but I'm perfectly fine getting going that way.
Well, and I guess that to kind of put a bow on, I mean, it's important to, I always felt it was important to put that in a contract to say that, yes, client, title company, anybody involved with this, you need to provide us with that, the most recently available title commitment for use on this survey. And because they're not going to go, so many of these people that are involved in this transaction, they don't know the standard. They don't know to go read it and know that they're going to have to provide these things. Just spell it out in your contract. Just remind them that they have to provide that information.
Right. I agree 100%, Tim. And But I would just say that I do hear from surveyors who say, well, they tried to give me something 5 years old. I told them they need to order a new title commitment. That is not my position to do
No,
that, right?
no.
If they want to give me a 10-year-old policy, I am perfectly happy with that. My survey is going to reflect that I used a 10-year-old policy. So it is not up to surveyors to tell people that they need to order title insurance.
Right. That's a great point. Thank you for making that, because I think we do get hung up on that
We do. Yeah.
it's, oh no, yeah, you're right. I've got to have the latest and greatest. Well, if this suffices, and this is what everybody's agreeing to, like, and I guess that was the whole point of, really this topic. It's in the contract. It's the latest available. It doesn't matter whether it's 2 weeks or 10 years. It's and everybody agrees upon it. So that's what the survey will be based upon.
Absolutely. And which, like you say, puts a bow around the whole issue of, let's be specific in the contract.
Well, very good. Any last words on really, I guess, to really put a bow on contracts and why they are so important? I mean, just general good business practice, but really for the land title survey to make sure we cover our bases.
Yeah. And I tell people, and you mentioned at the very beginning, well, I have these regular clients and we do things on a handshake. That's admirable. But I tell people who don't like that, the written contract, I mean, you know what? It protects the client also, right? It doesn't just protect me, it protects them because they have in writing what I am saying I am going to do. Right. And if something goes wrong and I didn't do that, then it's to their benefit to have it also. And
Exactly.
I think that's an important point for clients and for surveyors who, well, I've never used one before. Well, it's to your client's benefit also.
Exactly. I mean, bottom line is it fosters effective communication, and it develops that business relationship that's so necessary when you're, a lot of these surveys can get very expensive at times, and it's very important to have that, basically a little bit of a trust through this contract,
right, between
the clients and the surveyor. So absolutely. Well, great stuff as always, Mr. Kent. I appreciate your time, and we've got to meet. Our spring meetings are coming up for NSPS, so your committee will be getting together and talking about all the stuff that's come out of the 2021, and it's amazing to me that even when the brand new standard comes out, there's always things. It's always a moving target.
It is. I've got, 2-3 pages of suggestions already. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, that'll be as always, great conversation. And I guess I want to maybe tease a little bit. I guess going forward, in your opinion, are we going to have to start thinking about more digital products and digital submissions and other standards that our standard is going to have to comply with to meet the digital world?
It may. I think most of that probably would fall under contractual types of issues, but I do think we're going to need to look at a few things. And for example, the standards start off and say, this is basically an on the ground survey, except for table A item 15. Table A item 15 says, there's these other things that we could do. I think at some point, using, for example, a drone or whatever else should not be considered some outlier that has to fall under table A. Somehow at some point we need to fold that in and just recognize that this is in fact normal survey work nowadays, and it shouldn't be treated as some outlier. So I think that'll be an interesting thing that maybe we'll be working on for 2026.
Very good. Well, like I said, it's always amazing the things that change as soon as the standard comes out. And you're right. It is a moving target. We didn't think of this. We didn't think of that. It's human nature, but it's and that's what I try to concentrate and tell people. This is the value of being an NSPS member and how long this relationship has been going, and the value of what this committee and what these standards bring to the surveying profession. Bottom line, it is such a good thing, and I don't know that people really all of our practitioners really understand how valuable this all is.
Yeah, I'd like to think they do, but I know they don't. We don't reach probably half of the surveying community at best through all of the means that we try.
Well, we'll keep at it, but no, looking forward to a good committee meeting, and obviously, you're a fan favorite, so we'd like to have you back, and we'll talk about some things. So
absolutely, let's do it.
We'll do it again. Well, that'll wrap us up for this week of Surveyor Says. Thanks for joining us, and remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we do have some great conversations coming up. We're going to jump into some geodesy. We're going to jump into a lot of different things that still all survey related, obviously, but some things you may not have thought about. So we'll be talking to you soon. So in the meantime, we'll talk to you very, very soon. You've been listening to the Surveyor Says podcast, brought to you by the National Society of Professional Surveyors. If you have any questions about today's episode or any other topic, please email us at info@nsps.us.com, and we are here to help. Visit our website, nsps.us.com, to learn more about our association, the programs we administer and support, our sustaining members, and information about future episodes of Surveyor Says. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. And remember, it's a great day to be a surveyor.